Welcome to the NASCAR News Zone here on Motorsports Reports. My name is Phil, and I'll be guiding you through some of the big stories that took place in the world of NASCAR this past week. Of course, Tyler Reddick winning 3 consecutive Cup Series races for the first time in the history of the Cup Series is a big news story, and we talked about that along with the situation with Michael Jordan, of course, being 3 for 3. He's a car owner this year, and the vast sum of money he has invested. We also talk about Alex Bowman and having to get out of the car at Circuit of the Americas, and will now be out for the race at Phoenix, being replaced by Anthony Alfredo. The news of Cletus McFarland making his O'Reilly Series debut with Richard Childress Racing and signing a 2-year contract comes up, amongst other storylines that include the likes of Darrell Wallace Jr., Brad Keselowski, Ross Chastain, the JGR and Chris Gabehart lawsuit, and Kyle Busch, along with, of course, 5 drivers to watch at Phoenix. We will cover some of these stories, and you can catch all those videos here on Motorsports Reports. For the ones in the NASCAR News Zone, check on the timestamps accordingly. And if you want more news and highlights and takes in regards to the world of motorsports, please tune into the Gripster podcast that I host along with my co-host Josh on all podcast platforms. Kyle Busch was fired up on the radio, but this time it was in regards to his teammate, at least part-time teammate, at Circuit of the Americas. Busch, who ended up finishing 12th in Sunday's Cup Series event at the road course, was in a battle with his part-time teammate and O'Reilly Series champion Jesse Love. Steven Taranto, NASCAR reporter, shared a video of Busch's in-car camera and battling him and Love. Taranto said Love ran Busch really hard despite the 8-car running the 33 down multiple times. That eventually led to Busch shipping Love in the final corner. Kyle Busch was quoted on his radio saying, "Go back and bleeping watch the last 5 laps. Tell me that wasn't bleeping coming." I mean, I mentioned Busch's finishing 12th. Jesse Love ended up finishing 27th where he started, but it's interesting how that all took place. Kyle Busch being fired up about driving standard, the way that the Daytona 500 finished after he started on pole and he backed off to avoid the big wrecks and still got a top 15 finish. There was, driving with the likes of people running over Connor Zilisch a couple of times, Daniel Suarez and Eric Jones, and then he was still able to come back to a top 15 finish. I mean, it's similar to that for what Kyle Busch did. In terms of the driving standards of Jesse Love, he's supported by his team. RCR President Mike Verlander in February said Jesse Love is a talented racer, has consistently proven himself with strong on-track performance and an off-track demeanor that appeals to fans and partners. We're proud of his development. We look forward to helping him compete at the highest levels of the sport. So, I mean, they support him. They believe in his ability. And, of course, defending series champion. They have a big sponsorship deal over there with Whelen Engineering. So he's driven for them the last few years. He has had run-ins with other drivers in the past, not only in the O'Reilly Series, but in ARCA with some of his own driving standards. I mean, he's even spun out his best friend, Connor Zilisch, at Talladega last year, and then went on to win. But in the end, for Kyle Busch, trying to get back on the winning track, hasn't won since June of 2023. 2 top 15 finishes this season, 1 at Atlanta in a truck. So that he's trying to get some momentum going. RCR getting involved in some other entities with other people, trying to start some other careers. So we'll see how Kyle Busch moves forward this weekend at Phoenix, a track he's won at before, and Jesse Love in the O'Reilly Series this weekend as well. And tune in here to Motorsports Reports for all your motorsport news, and also the Gripster podcast hosted by me, Phil, and my co-host Josh. YouTube sensation Cletus McFarland, aka Garrett Mitchell, went on the Dale Jr. Download earlier this week, and also the Speed podcast with Kevin Harvick and Will Buxton, to announce that he has signed a deal with Richard Childress Racing to compete in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series for at least 3 races a year for this year and next year, and a greater focus on expanding his experience. Cletus was quoted as saying, "RCR called me up, offered me a ride in their O'Reilly car for 3 or 4 races a year for 2 years. He went further and said, pretty unbelievable to me, and I'm just so thankful and excited. It just doesn't even sound real coming out of my mouth still." It's an arrangement where he's done time in the simulator and getting feedback from different engineers, crew chiefs, and drivers on his driving style and driving, ability and experience at the moment, which is very limited, and he admitted as such during his conversation with Dale Jr. They discussed a whole variety of things in that show. McFarland went and took a whole tour with Ty Dillon, the grandson of Richard Childress, around the campus of Richard Childress Racing, went through a lot of the buildings that they have there. He will race at Rockingham Speedway on April 4th and will be sponsored by Tommy's Express Car Wash, which is a company that he is connected with in business, but also is very interested in wanting to do business with him and sponsor this endeavor, what it will be a 6-race endeavor. He admitted that his performance at Daytona in a truck was disheartening, but that he knows he needs to get more experience, and Dale Jr. talked to him about doing late model races, buying a late model, doing late model races, going and running more ARCA, running more O'Reilly trucks, etc., etc. Mitchell said Earnhardt was among the first people he contacted after receiving the offer and encouraged him to pursue the opportunity. The expectations, noting the performance could determine whether NASCAR allows him to compete at larger super speedways in the future, which is the ultimate goal for McFarland, to be able to be cleared to race at Talladega later this year and then Daytona further on. McFarland is focused a lot on the super speedways. RCR is the best at super speedways in the O'Reilly series, so if he does get cleared, he would be in a car that could compete immediately to win, though the notion that he would be able to beat his own teammates and Austin Hill and Jesse Love is to be determined. Talking about the chance of being lapped at Rockingham, Dale Jr. said, "There is a chance you'll be passed by leaders. You'll be judged by how well you get out of their way. I won't tell you what RCR is going to tell you to do, but one of them is coming by you on the outside. Don't drive into the corner. Just slip that car length earlier. Let them clear in front of you." Talking about how he should drive at Rockingham when he goes and makes his O'Reilly debut. And we'll see how Cletus McFarland does in that race, and then talk about anything goes on with that and more here on Motorsports Reports. After experiencing health issues this past weekend at Circuit of the Americas and having to get out of his car, Alex Bowman, after further tests this week, has been ruled out of the race at his hometown Phoenix Raceway. Driver Anthony Alfredo, who is a full-time competitor in the O'Reilly series, will fill in for Bowman. Has 43 starts in the Cup Series in the past, drove for Front Row Motorsports. He also does simulator testing for Hendrick Motorsports and Chevy, but the driver of the 48 Ally Chevy regular driver will not be able to compete. They will be looking to request a medical waiver for Bowman to remain eligible for the Cup Series Championship. Currently, he's last of the 36 chartered competitors in points after a brutal start to the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series campaign. Said that he is experiencing symptoms of vertigo. He's had similar symptoms in the past that has kept him out of the car in past years. Jeff Andrews, the president of Hendrick Motorsports, talked about Bowman undergoing 2 days of medical evaluation and driving laps in a streetcar at the 1010s Motor Club, a road course in Concord, North Carolina. Andrews quoted as saying, "Alex has worked very hard over the last several days. We are encouraged by the progress he's making, but we have to prioritize his health above all else. It's obviously frustrating for him because he's a competitor and wants to be in the race car, especially at his home track. We'll continue to support Alex and look forward to his return as soon as he's medically cleared." For Bowman, considering the start to his year, considering his struggles that he's had, and then wanting to do well at his home racetrack, at a track where in the past he's been able to lead, win a pole, unfortunate, but of course health does come first, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on in terms of will he get that medical waiver and how his health improves as we move forward into further races, and if he'll be able to drive at Las Vegas the following week. That's something that we'll have to keep an eye on now as we move forward. But this weekend, Alex Bowman will not be in the 48 car for Hendrick and Ally. It'll be Anthony Alfredo, aka Fast Pasta, on the sim racing realm. But for this and more news in the world of motorsports, keep up here with Motorsports Reports. In the event that Darrell Walsh Jr. has to miss a race for the impending birth of his and his wife Amanda's second child, 2311 is making alternative plans for that. Of course, Bubba and his wife Amanda welcomed their son Bex in September 2024 after a year where he missed the playoffs. Was able to celebrate with his son at Indianapolis last August when he won the Brickyard 400. Wallace is currently second in points, so it would affect his point standings trying to go and make the playoff for a second year in a row, but currently being second in points, albeit 70 points behind his teammate and runaway points leader Tyler Reddick after 3 consecutive wins. Wallace wants to be at the birth of his daughter here later this month, which would be at Darlington, it sounds like, based on the expected timeline. He's quoted as saying, "We've made the decision. I unfortunately missed the birth of my first kid. I'm not missing the second one," end quote. His spotter, Freddie Kraft, on Door Bumper Clear, said he's going to have a baby here in the next month. We're making plans for him probably missing a race if he has to. There's 3 plans based on what Kraft is saying. So it's like they have 3 plans. If everything goes and Bubba's going to be gone, and we know he's going to be gone, it's going to be Corey Heim probably, I would assume, and you got a day to get ready and prepare the cockpit for Corey. But if it happens where, we're a few hours out from the race and Amanda goes in labor, Bubba's got to leave, because right now I think she's due around Darlington. So if he has to leave Darlington in a hurry, it's going to be somebody else. That somebody else is possibly Ryan Truex, the younger brother of Martin Truex Jr. Truex was there last week because Tyler wasn't feeling well before the Atlanta race, so he was there in case. So in terms of who could possibly fill in, they have at least 2 options, and Corey Heim, of course, is a 2311 driver, and then Ryan Truex, who is a Toyota driver, has worked with Gibbs for the last few years, run limited races, and is someone that's part of that family and probably is connected with the Hamlin. And so those are 2 options. We could see somebody else, the like of maybe Harrison Burton, but we will see who they choose or who they get in place and how everything works out for that as we get closer to it and the birth of Bubba and Amanda's second child. After issues on pit road for the number 1 Trackhouse Racing Chevy of Ross Chastain, they have seen 2 of their pit crew members suspended for the next 2 points races. They had a wheel that was left loose and detached from the vehicle. So crew members Josh Appleby and Kenneth Pozek will be suspended. There were no other penalties from the weekend, but for Chastain, outside of the Atlanta Motor Speedway race where he finished third, he finished 35th at COTA and finished 20th at Daytona to sit 20th in the point standings. But in terms of that, for Chastain, down a couple of pit road members will affect him these next 2 weeks, especially with Phoenix. They have limited pit stops, and it's a interesting pit road. Vegas, you usually have green flag pit stops there, so that's an opportunity there. This article that appeared connects the stuff going on at COTA also with his recent run-in with Austin Hill at Atlanta in the O'Reilly series, talking about Chastain's driving style. Hill is one to talk about that, to be fair, but that's just the things he does. Austin Hill said Brian Blaney was quoted as saying, "At the end of that race, I don't blame either of them for doing what they did. Austin has to throw the block and Ross is going to take the run. It's just part of it," and it kind of accumulated at this late run that came from Ross because it took him a long time to get there. If that run comes halfway down the backstretch, you don't see that. But he just came in at 3, and Ross is like, "Well, I got to take this somewhere." And Austin just like, I got to protect. Just two guys that came together. That's just part of racing. Which then opened the door for Sheldon Creed to get his first career Xfinity Series win. So for Ross Chastain, yes, not ideal start to the Cup Series season for him. Losing a couple pit road members, running a couple of O'Reilly Series races, and getting the ire of a driver who was suspended for right hooking another driver last year and has had very questionable driving standards over his entire career. But for Chastain and for the Trackhouse team, going to a track at Phoenix Raceway where they have won before, so an opportunity for them to right the ship this weekend. In the latest NASCAR lawsuit, Joe Gibbs Racing versus their former competition director and former crew chief Chris Gabehart. They were victor in terms of a limited temporary restraining order earlier this week against Gabehart. The quote is, "We are pleased with today's ruling by the U.S. District Court for which Western District, North Carolina, for a temporary restraining order enforcing the terms of our contract with Chris Gabehart. We will continue the legal process to protect our information, fight for what is right for our race team, our employees, and our partners." This ruling stems from Gibbs' request to prevent Gabehart from performing duties for Spire Motorsports that overlap with the responsibilities he held while serving as JGR's competition director. Judge Susan C. Rodriguez granted a narrow temporary restraining order that restricts Gabehart from working in areas tied directly to his previous role, but she stopped short of blocking him from working for Spire altogether. Other duties are fair game, she said. The only restrictions are for involving competitive overlap with his former position. Spire and Gabehart's side do not see it as a major setback. Both have argued throughout the case that Gabehart's current role as Chief Motorsports Officer is broader than his job at JGR and involves oversight of multiple racing programs, not just NASCAR Cup Series competition. It also involved expedited discovery, requested communications between Gabehart, Spire co-owner Jeff Dickerson, and Team Motorsports CEO Dan Taurus. Team also pointed forensic evidence it believes raises concerns, including an internet search for the term indemnify shortly after a reported meeting between Gabehart and Spire leadership. Gabehart has denied any wrongdoing, previously stating he honored confidentiality agreements when leaving JGR. Spires also maintained that no proprietary information was shared and that his current position is not comparable to the one he held at JGR, which we talked about in another video. Case is far from finished. The next hearing is March 16th when the court will take up the issue of expedited discovery, possibility of broader injunction. So for Chris Gabehart, he continues to work in his Chief Motorsports Officer role, overseeing all the programs. How much of that information that gets transferred over, some of the, I guess, setup information, which is what came up that was discussed, and some of the other data and information that was developed over time, over all the many years that JGR has been around, especially with Toyota and especially in this next gen area since 2022, I think is a big part of this. But we'll keep looking at that and see how this case goes.
The Duramax Texas Grand Prix was on this weekend in the NASCAR Cup Series around the Circuit of the Americas in Austin. But who went to victory lane on the first road course of the 2026 season? Well, I've got everything that you need to know about that and all the other major talking points here on our NASCAR Cup Series review on the Motorsport Report. Let's have a look, guys. Let's have a look at all the main action here at COTA. So Tyler Reddick, of course, went into this weekend knowing that he could achieve history. No driver in the history of the NASCAR Cup Series, going all the way back to its formation in 1948, has won the opening 3 rounds of the season in a row. Of course, he won the season opening Daytona 500. Then he also went to Atlanta, Georgia, and backed it up with another victory last weekend. But what happened this weekend? Well, he got off to the perfect start in a sense before the race actually got going. He, of course, achieved pole position on Saturday, but he wasn't able to hold that lead going around the first lap of this race. Chase Briscoe, who started alongside him on the front row, got it, and despite a good fight back from the 45 car in the back parts of the circuit, he wasn't able to retake the lead. And honestly, after that point, Reddick kind of faded away really. He dropped down to about 8th or so position and was one of the many drivers to stop before the final few laps of this first stage. Of course, the pit lane closed with 2 laps remaining in this one. Ryan Blaney took the lead before the end of the first stage. However, Briscoe and Reddick pitted before the end of this stage, which meant that Ross Chastain won stage 1. Second thing we learned is that it's very tricky going through that first corner in COTA. It's of course completely blind as the apex heading into it. You are braking uphill and it's very wide as well, but it tightens on the exit, which very much encourages people to sling their car down the inside and try and make a few overtakes. It's the main overtaking point on the entire circuit. And unfortunately, it was one of the most inexperienced drivers in the field, 19-year-old Connor Zilic, who fell foul of this. He spun and somehow didn't collect anybody. Of course, he was very much red-faced, his tyres were very much flat-spotted, and he needs to go into the pits to go for those repairs. But somehow, no real damage on his car other than his tyres. And no caution flag either, he just got up going again. Blaney was again in the lead late on in the second stage, but he pitted for fresh rubber, and it was Ty Gibbs who took the stage win in stage 2, his first ever around a road course. Third thing we learned is that Reddick was back at the front after all that shook out. He was leading in the opening stages of the third and final stage around COTA. Briscoe had an opportunity to win, but unfortunately for him, he had some kind of transmission issue. I think he was saying that only one of his 4 wheels was driving, when it should of course just be 2 of them. So that was causing problems and he was out of the contest as a result. There really wasn't that many cautions, but we got a few late on. The main one, of course, being for Chastain, who ended up losing his wheel. He managed to get through to the pits, but the fact that there was a loose wheel on the track meant there was a full course caution, and that meant that most people ended up pitting. The strategy at this point was really fascinating. But after all that, Reddick ended up leading at the restart. There was a pretty big pile-up as well heading into turn 1, but again, Reddick just kept cool. He kept going. And like I said, if he won this race, he'd be able to make NASCAR history. He couldn't do it, could he? Well, he didn't have it all entirely his own way, or at least it seemed like it at certain points. With just a few laps to go, Shane Van Gisbergen, who of course he won a bunch of road course races last year in the Cup Series, he was pretty close, but he ended up fading away as his tyres presumably ran out of grip. We also had a spin out of nowhere. Carson Hocevar spinning it on the main straight just completely by himself, but he ended up recovering it and no caution flag as a result, and that meant that Reddick was comfortable. He dominated this race. He absolutely deserved it. Michael Jordan, I know he's a busy man, but he needs to keep coming to these races if Reddick is going to keep winning. An absolute good luck charm. That cannot be denied. Yeah, incredible stuff, guys. Like I said, nobody has managed to do this before in the history of NASCAR. Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt Sr., Richard Petty, None of them have ever achieved this before. Unbelievable stuff. But guys, let me know your thoughts about this weekend's race around COTA. Give it a rating out of 10 in the comments. Yay or nay? I want to hear what you have to say, as always, on this one. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this, though, guys. And, of course, we'll be back with plenty more NASCAR news in the meantime. Looking forward to Phoenix next weekend.